the battle between brutality and harmony. This is the heart of Rebel Moon. So let's take a deep dive into the plot, the characters, and the lore. And yes, there's quite a bit of lore surrounding this new universe. I've scoured all of the interviews from Zack Snyder himself, the cast, the prop department crew, magazine articles, and anything I've been able to get my hands on to bring you everything we know so far about Rebel Moon. Let's start with the plot. Korra, a former soldier of the brutal interstellar Royal Empire, escapes from her life in the Imperium to the quiet farming moon of Velt. Admiral Noble is traveling the galaxy on behalf of the Empire and the tyrannical Regent Belisarius when he shows up in a Dreadnought-class battlecruiser on Velt. Now, it seems they're there to take the resources of the farmers and the land they live on. It's here that Korra's violent past resurfaces as the Imperials start to pressure the small village. She knows pretty much immediately that the arrival of the Imperium spells the death for the colony. Admiral Noble realizes who Korra is and sends a message to Regent Belisarius, who's back on the Motherworld, that he's located Korra, the most notorious fugitive in the galaxy. Now, it appears that she goes and escapes the village and starts out on a quest to round up warriors to help fight this giant threat. The rebels, at least the ones she's recruiting as far as we can tell so far from the trailer and from interviews, includes Velt farmer Gunner, knightly robot Jimmy, mercenary Kai, former Imperium General Titus, former nobleman Tarak, cyborg sword wielder Nemesis, refugee Milius, and rebel insurgent siblings Darian and Deborah Bloodaxe. Now, according to Zack Snyder, the heart of the movie is about finding family and Korra finding a place to call home, something that she wants to protect. Now, this story is a battle between brutality and harmony. Admiral Noble leads the Imperium that brings destruction to civilizations and entire worlds, where the farming moon Velt and this small village represents a kindness and connection to nature and harmony. Now, about 4 years prior to the events of Rebel Moon, the Imperium, which has been the ruling entity of the galaxy since the beginning of time, has had a violent regime change, which resulted in the death of the royal family. So Korra has now gone AWOL from the Imperial Army, has found peace and a bit of happiness on Velt when the Imperials show up, and she has to do whatever it takes to defend it. Now, for the characters, some of this is going to be surface level descriptions, and then in the lore section, we're going to dive a bit further and learn more about them. Let's start with Korra. She's a villager on the planet Velt who's deserted the Imperium where she was part of the military. While a soldier of the Royal Army, her violent ways earned her the nickname Scargiver. Her family was actually slaughtered by the Imperium when she was a little girl, and then later indoctrinated into the Empire's army. Kai is a mercenary pilot who helps out with the rebels and of course has a heart of gold. Gunner is a naive Velt farmer who doesn't know a whole lot about the galaxy but ends up being part of the rebel group. The main antagonist of the story is Admiral Atticus Noble. He's a nefarious Imperium enforcer who violently lands on Velt to claim the harvest of the village. General Titus is a hardened gladiator who served the Imperium. He's a gladiator now, fighting in a place called the Colosseum. He was known as a highly intelligent military strategist with the Empire before he went AWOL. He was a comrade of Korra during their time together in the army, and both defected around the same time. Tarak is a prince from a world called Niu Wodi. He became an indentured servant to a rancher to help pay off a life debt. He was part of a noble family until they had a run-in with the Motherworld. He shares a special bond with a flying creature called a Bennu, which is from his home planet of Niu Wodi. Now, Bennu are griffin-like creatures, and the one we see Tarak chase in the trailer is considered to be an unrideable one. I read too that we're also going to see a white one in a flashback at some point, and we're also going to see more of Tarak's backstory in Rebel Moon Part 2, Scargiver, which is going to be in April. The next character is Nemesis. She's going to be part of the Rebel crew. Now, she's a cyborg swordmaster whose mechanical hands allow her to wield molten metal weapons. Now, these metal gloves or gauntlets are ancient artifacts from her home world, and we're going to talk more about Nemesis here in the lore part of this video in just a minute. Her nemesis is a creature called Harmata. Harmata is a massive spider-like humanoid creature who lives in the depths of a mining world called Dagus. We see her clash with Nemesis in the trailer. Now, Darian and Deborah Bloodaxe are rebel siblings who have been fighting the Imperium using guerrilla warfare tactics, and before they join Korra and the rebels, have very limited resources, so they do things like disrupting the supply lines and hit and run attacks on the Imperium, but overall they have little effect before they join the rebels. Jimmy is an ancient robot knight called the JC class robot. Now, he had the designation JC 1435 or JC 1435 that once defended a slain king centuries ago, but he's now faded into a more peaceful existence, and I'm going to go into more depth of his role here in just a minute. Then we have Regent Balisarius. He's Admiral Noble's boss. He's grim and remorseless and shares a past with Korra and a future. We're also going to get to see the King of the Galactic Empire, who was actually killed about 4 years before the events of Rebel Moon, and he's played in flashbacks by Carrie Elwes. Now, the locations. First one, obviously, is Velt. It's a small, primitive farming and agricultural moon in a remote part of the galaxy that orbits a giant red gas planet. Next is the mother world called Toa, and it's the home of the Imperium and essentially the center of the galaxy. Next is Niuwodi. This is the desert-like planet and the homeworld of Tarak and the Bennu creature. Next we have Dagus, a mining world where we see the conflict of Harmata and Nemesis. It looks very Blade Runner-esque. Next, Pollux. Now, we only see a glimpse of Pollux in the trailer, but it has what looks like the remnants of an ancient civilization. We also have Sharoan. This planet looks like a more mystical planet with huge Buddha-like monoliths, and we see a dreadnought warship destroy one of these statues in the trailer. Next is Gondoval, but not much is known about this planet yet, other than the rebels go there. Next we have Vanna. Vanna is a moon near Toa, the mother world. Now, we won't get to see this moon until Rebel Moon Part 2, Scargiver, so it's gonna have to remain a mystery until then, but the Imperium does refer to this moon as Rebel Moon. So I'm gonna give a hot take here and say that this moon will become extremely important in the Rebels' battle with the Imperium. Alright, now let's dive into my absolute favorite subject. You guys that have watched this channel and know about Star Wars, I love digging into the lore. And yes, we do have lore to talk about in Rebel Moon. Let's start with Jimmy. Jimmy is what's called a JC class robot. Now, these AI robots like him were built with a specific purpose in mind. And from what we know and some nuggets that Snyder has dropped, these robots were built for fighting and for protection. Now, the robots that were referred to as Jimmys were all created to protect the unborn Princess Issa, as well as the King of the Galactic Empire, and they lost their purpose when the royal family was assassinated. Now, the Imperium repurposed Jimmy to do their heavy lifting and was brought by Admiral Noble to Velt, where he met a local villager named Sam. She gives him a daisy chain which stirs something in his mechanical mind, and he ends up changing his outlook on his own existence. He finds a deer-like carcass and takes the antlers to wear like a crown, which we see of course in the beautiful trailer. Now, we also have some lore about Nemesis. I think every Star Wars fan saw her glowing swords in the trailers and immediately thought lightsabers. I mean, this was originally pitched by Zack as a Star Wars movie back before Lucasfilm was bought out by Disney. So let's dig into the little bit of the lore that we do know about Nemesis and her swords. So her arms have these mechanical gloves that are connected to special blades. These swords charge up her hands and the blades become this heated element that look almost like plasma of a lightsaber, but with a pretty cool and unique light trail as she swings them. Now, Nemesis, she cut off her hands in order to have these gauntlets attached as a rite of passage used by warriors on her homeworld. Nemesis did this after her children were killed by the Imperium. Now, during the events of Rebel Moon, she has made her way to a planet called Dagus, where she has, so far, killed 16 high-ranking Imperium officials on her quest for revenge. We briefly see another character with blue swords in the trailer, so we can assume this other warrior is from the same world as Nemesis. Alright, I want to talk about these scribes. These look incredible, but the scribes are a religious order from the mother world tasked with writing the history of the galaxy. Of course, history is written by the victors, so there's a clear bias with what they write. So the objective truth is being left out and or manipulated and distorted to fit how the Imperium wants history remembered. But they have a unique and quite terrifying way of recording their memories. They call it memory manipulation. They use human bodies to store their memories, placing these bodies in stasis among a collection of other living people that they could go and access anytime they want. Each person is essentially represents a page in the history books. Now, as far as guns go in the Rebel Moon galaxy, they really wanted to come up with their own language and new shapes to their weapons in this world. Now, one type of gun that we do know they use is something called a lava cork. Now, these bullets from the lava corks have a really heavy mass and they burn red hot. Okay, let's look at our antagonist, Admiral Atticus Noble. He carries with him a bone staff. Now, this is a mythological relic from the mother world, Toa. When the first of the royal family were born hundreds of thousands of years ago, the first king was carried across the desert by some creature, a giraffe-like animal, and the staff, if you look closely, it's got a little piece of the original bone. So this staff is made of a bone, but it's not actually original. But this window inside the staff itself carries a piece of the actual femur. Now, the protagonist, Korra. Her nickname with the Imperium is Scargiver, so clearly she has a very violent and bloody past. In the trailer, Jimmy, voiced by Anthony Hopkins, talks about the story of Princess Issa. She was called the Redeemer. Now, the prophecy says that this child would stop the madness of war. Now, it's heavily implied through both the editing and everything else you see that Korra is actually Princess Issa. And the nuggets have been dropped about Korra having ties to the Regent Belisarius of the Imperium. Now, the editing of the trailer really pushes this, but I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out she isn't. So she mentions in the trailer that she's a child of war, so we're just gonna have to wait and see. Now, Zack talked in an interview about Princess Issa. He teased that he's had the title of the movie for a long time, A Child of Fire, and that it has a double meaning. He says that the Child of Fire could be Princess Issa, this myth that runs through the series. Now, Korra is also a Child of Fire. She was a war orphan. So this title refers to both Issa and Scargiver. These two myths are braided together in a pretty cool way. Now, Zack has talked about in interviews also about huge lore expansions and world building, as well as we know that the second movie, Part 2, Scargiver, will be out in April of 2024. He also talks about working on animated prequels and spin-off comics and a video game, so potentially this can end up being a huge universe with lots of upcoming content to explore. Now, one series that's in the works covers the backstory of Regent Belisarius. There's also a comic called The House of the Blood Axe, which covers Darian and Deborah Bloodaxe. And then of course we get an R-rated Snyder cut of the movie, which will probably make it into the 4-hour range, which I'm definitely looking forward. So make sure to subscribe here at Phoenix Squadron for everything coming up with Rebel Moon, and of course, everything with Star Wars. Thank you guys so much for watching, and may the Force be with you.